This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
This week's ChangeMaker is Atticus LeBlanc, the founder and CEO of PadSplit, a private housing company focused on providing affordable houses. PadSplit was founded in 2017 and already has units including single and multifamily properties. PadSplit also increased yield by more than 100% for property owners by using existing housing stock as shared housing. Atticus, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Your current approach to affordable housing has been called unconventional by some, which I really embrace because that's one of the many reasons we have you on this podcast. But really, you're no stranger to the subsidized housing world. So tell us about what your background was before you started PadSplit.
Sure. Well, I've spent pretty much my entire career in real estate here in the Atlanta area, and started in the commercial world, but in 2007, 2008, really started getting into housing. So I've been an affordable housing entrepreneur now for more than 13 years, and have had experience with all sorts of more traditional affordable housing subsidy programs, whether that's housing choice vouchers or working with tax credits on projects as well, and was really just very frustrated by how slow and tedious and inefficient those programs were at creating the supply that I knew we needed in order to sufficiently address this problem.
When you talk about your experience in some of those programs, it's a great insight from the traditional model compared to what you're doing now. What would be some of the improvements that you couldn't make then, but now you're being able to incorporate?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is speed and just cost effectiveness, right? I think as you look at where we are today in terms of the major problems that we have in affordable housing, there are really two primary issues. One is, of course, housing supply, and it is a simple, although not really, supply and demand problem. And we have dramatically insufficient housing supply in order to meet the demand that exists today in virtually every market in America. The second major question is access and who has access to that housing. And if you look at what average rents are in, again, almost any market in America, the reality is there is a dramatic amount of the population that is working full time, in some cases 2 jobs, that simply cannot afford or even qualify for units available at those rental rates. And so we were built to address these two problems head on, both the housing supply by taking advantage of wasted, inefficient space inside homes that already existed that simply were not being used for housing, and then also decreasing the barriers to entry with no upfront deposits, for instance, no minimum credit scores, including all the utilities so people don't have to go pay utility deposits, and actually wrapping all of these services into one consistent bill that is then billed on a weekly or per payday basis. So it's very easy to budget around. And by attacking both of these things simultaneously, we're able to, without any capital subsidy required from the federal or local government, create housing, new supply. We've actually created more than 3,000 units in the last 3 years, but also make it accessible to people who are median income around $22,000 a year, which those folks have zero traditional options available to them other than sitting on a wait list for some subsidized housing program somewhere. But they're still working full time, and we really believe that the people who are serving our communities deserve an opportunity to live there. And the reality is the current market just has not provided that. And that's really what we're built to do. So it's not just unconventional, it's pretty revolutionary when you look at what the other options have been versus what they are today.
So tell us how you got started.
It's funny. So in 2009, I started buying homes in 2008. I eventually owned and managed about 550 affordable rentals. But in 2009, I had a vacant house in Southwest Atlanta, And there was I was discovering, because I was on the ground very much. I mean, I was really just the only guy. I was the acquisitions person, the real estate agent, the property manager, the contractor, all of the above. And so I got to know these neighborhoods really well, and I got to know some of the people who lived there extremely well. And I came to understand what a rooming house was. I had never even heard that term before, despite the fact that my degree was in architecture and urban studies. So these things have existed. Shared housing has existed forever, since humans lived in caves. But it's also been the de facto option for low-income workers. And so I actually had a rooming house next door to a home that I owned that was empty. And of course, in 2009, it was in the depths of the financial crisis. There were two guys, Otis and Mitch, who were renting rooms in that house. And this was a terrible home. It was there was a tarp on the roof as long as I'd ever known. There were wires hanging off the side. It was just in horrid condition that Otis and Mitchell were living in. And they came to me one day and said, hey, the house is getting foreclosed and we're all going to be evicted. So can the two of us come rent rooms in your house? And I'd never considered the idea, but they walked me through exactly what would need to be done in order to make it suitable for them. And I said, well, yeah, absolutely, you can do that. And at the same time, I realized, well, wait a second, if two of these guys are going to pay $100 a week per room, and I have 4 rooms in this relatively small property, I would actually net more revenue renting to these people who cannot afford anything else on the traditional market, as opposed to if I rented it, the entire house to a family or to an individual. And so that was really the first aha moment in 2009. And I just started iterating, started experimenting with it from there, and was, of course, comparing how this property performed relative to the other properties that I had and the other models, and saw, wait a second, we are spending a tremendous amount of public money to create quote unquote capital A affordable housing that takes a really long time. And at the same time, I've housed Otis and Mitch without any additional subsidy and actually creating higher net revenue. So something is amiss. And 7 years later, I guess, I wrote the white paper for an enterprise community partners affordable housing competition on what would become PadSplit, and how I thought the world should really look at this option and how it could dramatically increase supply and improve access.
You've even written an article in Forbes where you highlighted just this exact same thing. And you talked about a HUD memo that, even mentioned shared housing and it being a viable option. Did you write that to kind of further this concept here, or reaffirm what you were doing? And tell us about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the reality is that in this country, we have been using space very inefficiently. If you look at over the last 60 years, the average size of a new single-family home has more than tripled. And do we really need that? No, especially when you look at what has happened with average family size and household size in the U.S., which of course has declined over 20%. So you have declining family sizes and an increase in the number of single adults that are living alone or renting or even having a mortgage with other single adults. At the same time, our housing stock is just getting bigger and bigger. That doesn't make any sense. And if there's one thing I can't stand, it's waste and inefficiency. And so the idea of all of these bedrooms that are sitting unused, or even putting on your investor or landlord hat and saying, wait a second, how much space is unmonetized and sitting empty in a rental home, while we also know that there is a huge portion of the population and the workforce that are desperate for housing options. So why not just figure out a way to capture and utilize that existing space and provide new, more affordable housing options with it? And so that was really the idea behind the platform, and of course that article. And I've written a fair amount about these issues. And just why aren't we using what we already have much more wisely than we are?
It's so interesting because you're talking about, utilization of space and resources, trying to meet supply and demand dynamics at the same time where you've got rising rents and this gap in housing. And so what I find so fascinating is that you're bringing another model to the table here and not that traditional build it, lease it, and rely on those traditional tools that have always been in place. And we heard some of this on a previous podcast that we've done when we brought a tiny homes concept and we looked at alternate dwelling units. And for many markets, this is another tool that can address some of this. And, for Atlanta, what have you seen be the response to this model here?
Well, it really depends, I guess, on what side of the issue you happen to be on. Our fundamental belief is that the people and the workforce who are serving our communities deserve an opportunity to live in them. And so if you are someone who believes that, then you are generally in favor of the model and the fact that we've been able to create here in Atlanta more than 2,400 units serving a population of the workforce that's average income $22,000 a year without any public subsidy. And in doing so, the commensurate amount that otherwise would have been required to serve that population and create that number of units would have been north of $200 million. For anyone that is in affordable housing or in economics or believes in just improved economic impact for cities and improved environmental impacts for cities, they've largely been in favor. Where we run into support or run into opposition rather, not surprisingly, is from people who don't necessarily believe that, or they believe that their neighborhood should just be for them and for people like them. The crowd that is often referred to as NIMBYs, not in my backyard type of individuals. So I think, as you would expect, for the people who are largely supportive versus the people who aren't.
Just looking at the dashboard numbers wise, PadSplit has raised about $35 million in capital. You've been named one of the top 10 companies in Georgia, tech companies that is, and you've also been the Affordable Housing Company of the Year and received an award from Prop Tech Innovations Award. Why do you think all of this attention is coming your way and coming to PadSplit's initiatives?
I think people are desperate for solutions. For the people who care about their communities and care about their workers, it's painful. I mean, I don't think I realized until much later than I would care to admit that it was possible in this country for people to be working full time and not be able to afford housing. And I think most of the U.S. population still doesn't really understand that, but more and more people are, particularly if you live in relatively urban metropolitan areas, because you see it. And anyone who has had a conversation
right.
with the cashier, with the clerk, with someone working in the back of the kitchen, and in many cases, people who are teachers or emergency workers, security guards at the local hospital or health center. If you've had any of these conversations with individuals about what their housing options are and what they're doing for housing, it's hard not to feel empathy and just be really angry at the situation that exists as it does today and the relative lack of housing choices that are available for those individuals. I think that's definitely been a major factor in why we have gotten the amount of attention that we have. In some ways, a solution that seems really obvious. Again, like, people have been living together and sharing for a long, long time. We've accepted as a culture that it's perfectly reasonable for college roommates to share a home, and it's perfectly reasonable to put senior citizens sharing a home together. But for some reason, no one really thinks about it as kosher when you talk about folks in between those two age groups or anyone who's in the workforce who can't afford other options. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And then just the frustration that, look, you think about how often have you used your formal dining room, and how often do any of us use it over the course of a year? Whereas, especially in a rental scenario, if you are the investor owning a property, that formal dining room, which doesn't generate any income, could actually go create affordable housing and create additional revenue for your bottom line as well.
Speaking of bottom line, you obviously have figured out a way to make a private company be in the space of affordable housing. And obviously, there's a profit behind this. Why would you think that other companies are leery from doing the same thing in other cities?
It's a great question. And for us, it was very intentional. I mean, I feel extremely fortunate over the course of my entrepreneurial career to just have been able to become financially independent, which was largely attributable to buying a house out of foreclosure when I was 23 years old. And I can trace a lot of my success back to that initial decision, which was due in large part just to luck. But I haven't forgotten that. And so when I started PadSplit in 2017, it was very much with the intention of do good, do well mentality. I didn't know what a B Corp was, but when we rechartered and raised our first round of funding, we did so as a public benefits corporation. And what that means is we have this social impact mission to house people below 80% of the area median income baked into our charter. And so not only do we have an obligation to our shareholders, but we also have an obligation to actually fulfill our mission as well. And it's ingrained into our DNA across the company culture. We always talk about care, show it, prove it. I think you're seeing more and more of it across the country and with a lot more companies and just an understanding that it would be next to impossible for us to have scaled the way that we have as a nonprofit. I wish that were not the case, but it simply is. And if we're going to go attract outside capital, particularly from venture capital partners, we have to do so as a for-profit organization, but we also don't want to lose our mission. And so I think you're starting to see more and more attraction to those types of models where people understand that you can do well while also earning profit.
I want to get back to the culture and mission aspect of your company, but first let's talk about the scale you just mentioned and the new investment. You've got about $20 million in new funding coming. Is that correct? And,
Correct.
What's your plans for that?
Really, at this point, it's to grow. It's to grow and expand the impact. And we know that for every person we house, we're going to be on average creating $420 in savings per month for those individuals. And what drives us is seeing both the anecdotal personal stories that are just truly incredible, where we, in one case, a woman, Kiosha, had lived with us, and over the period of time that she did, had improved her credit score and built enough savings where she could purchase her own home, and historically had not been able to even afford a place to live with her two children, and had to place her two children with her mom. And now, because of this platform and her diligence, was able to purchase a home and move in her family under the same roof and start to build generational wealth. And folks have started businesses, purchased cars that they otherwise couldn't have been able to afford, even just built up a deposit to move into their own apartment. And so those anecdotal stories of real transformational life impacts are one thing that really keeps us going. And then, of course, we are always tracking the data as well, and seeing that we know more than 85% of our population has improved their credit scores while they've stayed with us, because we are working with partners to report those on-time payments to credit agencies, so that if people come in with no credit scores or low credit scores, they have the ability and largely have improved those over time. So the savings and the those personal stories are really what keep us going, and we're just excited to continue that mission. And we know that with the funding that we've got, the more of those impacts that we can create, the better off we will be. And we're just excited to expand into new markets and again, see more occasions where the people who are serving our communities deserve an opportunity to live in them. And hopefully with PadSplit, they actually can.
In this expansion of new markets, is it still going to be in Atlanta, or are you going to other cities?
So we're in 9 markets right now,
Okay.
Largely across the Southeast and Midwest, but we're open to working with partners really in any city. And the biggest factor for us in opening in a new market is just having property owners and hosts in that market who are committed to the model and are mission aligned and can have enough inventory over a 12 to 18 month period to be able to justify the costs on us of opening in that market and the marketing expenses and those types of things. But yeah, we're already in 9 markets right now, and hope to be able to expand to a number more. I mean, the vision is to be able to create a set of tools and services that are available to anyone, anywhere, so that anyone around the world that is interested in taking this model to create affordable housing, and they may have space, that they can do it.
I want to loop back to one of the things you just now mentioned, and this credit score improvement. It's really an unusual success metric, whether that is improved credit scores or really establishing credit for the first time. Is that just a byproduct of housing stability, or is this something that you actually have incorporated into your, management model?
Yeah, so it is something that we've incorporated into it. A lot of people don't know, but typically rent payments are not reported to the credit bureaus. And so if you don't have any other trade lines personally, there's often no way for you to even improve your credit score. And this is a very low barrier entry way to do it. So we partner with a company called Isuzu, and I've known those folks for a long time, and we have a very close operating partnership. And so they report all payments that are made to contribute to that credit score. And of course, we're reporting all that positive data. And as a result, we're seeing average scores increase more than 40 points, even just within a couple of months.
It's amazing when you talk about people being able to economically move forward and really have self-sufficiency in whatever arena that is. Not everybody is saving for a down payment, or like you mentioned, maybe it's a deposit on some type of a different place or location. But improving that credit score can really have a positive ripple effect for individuals. It's all fascinating and innovative, and I can talk about this for so much longer, but we have to take a break. So coming up in the second part of my conversation with Atticus LeBlanc, the founder and CEO of PadSplit, Atticus shares PadSplit's overarching mission.
We strive to be a world-class marketplace that enables the fastest and most cost-effective solutions for the affordable housing shortage for low-income earners.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.